I cannot imagine any condition which would cause a ship to founder. Modern shipbuilding has gone beyond that. Pretty bold words, right?
Yeah, especially considering who said them.
Exactly. Those were the words of Captain E.J. Smith.
Of the Titanic.
Yep, the Titanic. And he said that in 1907.
Oh, wow. So
5 years before.
5 years before, yeah.
You know, history had a very different story to tell.
It's a classic example of underestimating the possibility of those extreme, unpredictable events.
Those black swans.
Those black swan events, exactly.
And that's exactly what we're diving into today. You requested a deep dive into Taleb's The Black Swan, the impact of the highly improbable.
So we're going to be talking about risk and uncertainty and the limits of knowledge.
I'm guessing some of you out there are interested in understanding how to better assess risk, maybe in your business ventures, or perhaps you're just fascinated by those limits of human knowledge. Whatever your reason.
You ready for some serious food for thought?
Yeah, so let's start at the beginning. What exactly is a black swan event?
Well, Taleb outlines 3 key characteristics. First, it's unpredictable.
Okay, so we can't see it coming.
Right. Second, it has a massive impact.
So it's not just like, your everyday little mishap.
I know, this is something that really shakes things up.
Okay, and third.
And third, we only try to make it seem less random after it's happened.
It's like we're trying to impose order on chaos.
Exactly. We look back and we say, oh, yeah, all the signs were there.
Even though we didn't see them at the time.
Right. We're basically trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, trying to make sense of something that, by its very nature,
Defies explanation.
Exactly.
So give me an example. Would something like 9/11 be considered a black swan event?
Absolutely. It was completely unforeseen. It had a world-altering impact.
And I'm sure afterwards people were scrambling to find explanations.
Oh, yeah. Countless analyses and reports trying to figure out how it happened and why.
And probably a lot of, we should have seen this coming.
Right. But the reality is, no one did.
And that's the point, right? These black swans, they defy our attempts at prediction. But are we talking just about global events here? Or can these black swans show up in our everyday lives?
They definitely can.
Okay, so like what?
Think about, those moments in your own life that seem to come out of nowhere.
Okay, yeah.
A sudden illness, a chance encounter that leads to a new career path, that kind of thing.
Or, the classic, you meet the love of your life when you least expect it.
Exactly.
Those moments where your entire trajectory shifts.
Just like that.
Unexpectedly.
Those are personal black swans.
I've definitely had a few of those in my life. So how do we wrap our heads around this idea that these massively impactful, unpredictable events
Can just pop up at any moment.
Yeah, because honestly, it can be a little unsettling.
It is, and that's why it's crucial to recognize that these black swans aren't just outliers.
They're not just flukes.
Right. They are fundamental to how our world works.
Okay, I like that. So it's not about like trying to avoid them or pretend they don't exist.
No, it's about understanding the role they play.
So how do we do that? How do we start to understand this black swan world?
Well, Taleb provides this framework.
Okay.
He distinguishes between 2 domains, Mediocristan and Extremistan.
Mediocristan and Extremistan.
Yeah.
Now, those are some interesting terms. Tell me more about this distinction.
Okay, so Mediocristan is where the average reigns supreme. Think about things like human height or weight.
Okay, yeah.
You're not going to find someone who's, 100 miles tall.
Right, there are limits.
There are, yeah. Extremistan, on the other hand, is where single events can have these disproportionately large impacts. Think wealth distribution or book sales.
So in Mediocristan, if I look at a sample, I can get a pretty good idea of the whole.
Yeah.
But in Extremistan, one outlier can completely skew the picture.
Exactly. It's the difference between, say, the impact of the heaviest person on Earth versus the impact of the richest person on the global economy.
Ooh, good example.
One barely registers, while the other can single-handedly shift markets.
So in Extremistan, those outliers, those black swans,
They're calling the shots.
they're the ones making the rules. So now I have to ask myself, what domains am I operating in?
Exactly.
Huh.
Because if you're applying Mediocristan thinking to Extremistan problems,
That's a recipe for disaster.
yeah, it's like trying to use a ruler to measure the ocean.
It's just not going to work. So we've got these black swans lurking in the shadows, especially in Extremistan. And we humans, well, we're not exactly known for handling uncertainty well. Why is that?
Well, our brains are wired for linear thinking and storytelling.
We love a good narrative.
Yeah, we crave simple explanations and tend to underestimate the role of chance.
So even when things are essentially random, we try to create these neat little stories. It's like we can't accept the fact that sometimes things just happen.
And this is what Taleb refers to as our blindness to randomness.
Blind to randomness.
And it leads to what he calls the narrative fallacy.
Okay, the narrative fallacy.
Basically trying to create these neat narratives even when events are essentially random.
We're forcing a story onto something that might not have a clear storyline.
And to highlight this, this need we have to confirm pre-existing beliefs, he uses a thought experiment.
I love thought experiments. What is it?
He asks, if seeing one more white swan confirms the idea that all swans are white,
Okay, yeah, I follow.
then surely seeing a red Mini Cooper also confirms that, right?
Wait, what? That doesn't make any sense.
It's nonsensical, right?
Totally.
But it illustrates how we selectively focus on evidence that supports our beliefs and ignore anything that contradicts them.
So we're not looking at the full picture. We're just looking for things that fit our preconceived notions. I love that, the red Mini Cooper test.
Yeah, it's a good one.
I'm definitely going to be using that from now on. But this bias, it's not just about swans and Mini Coopers, is it?
No, not at all.
This probably influences how we view everything.
It does.
The news, political debates, even personal successes and failures.
Exactly. Are we giving too much credit to skill and not enough to pure chance?
Are we just lucky?
It's a question worth asking. And even more concerning is this problem of silent evidence, as Taleb calls it.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this silent evidence thing.
So we tend to base our understanding of the world on what we see,
Okay.
but we often neglect what we don't see.
So it's like the things that are hidden from view, the stuff we don't even know we're missing.
Exactly. Think about successful entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
We see their accomplishments, and we assume they must be brilliant. We don't see all the entrepreneurs who failed along the way.
All those businesses that went bankrupt, all
Right.
those ideas that never got off the ground.
All those silent failures.
It's like we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg.
We're like those social media feeds where everyone seems to be living their best life.
Yeah, and you start to wonder if you're the only one who, eats cereal for dinner.
Exactly. You're only seeing a carefully curated highlight reel.
And this blindness to silent evidence, it can lead to some pretty dangerous conclusions.
It can, yeah. Taleb uses the example of Giacomo Casanova,
Yeah.
who was constantly escaping from dangerous situations, leading him to believe he was invincible.
So he was just lucky.
Well, we don't hear about all the other Casanovas who weren't so lucky.
It creates this illusion of invincibility.
It does, yeah.
Like thinking modern shipbuilding is beyond founding right before,
The Titanic sinks.
we underestimate past risks because we're only looking at the survivors.
Right, the success stories.
The ones who made it through.
What else does he talk about?
Give me some more examples of this silent evidence.
He talks about the drowned worshipers who didn't pray for protection.
Interesting.
We only hear about the ones who prayed and survived, creating this false narrative about the effectiveness of prayer.
So we're assuming there's a causal link, when maybe it's just random chance.
Or think about the lost manuscripts of potentially great authors. We only have access to the works of those who succeeded.
Giving us this skewed view of literary talent. So we think, oh, only the best writers get published, when maybe there are tons of amazing books out there that just never saw the light of day.
It's entirely possible.
So if we're constantly bombarded with these success stories but never see the failures, it's no wonder we overestimate our ability to predict the future.
Which brings us to another crucial point, the limitations of experts and predictions.
Especially when it comes to those areas that are heavily influenced by black swans.
Right, because if these events are, by definition, unpredictable.
How much stock should we really put in those expert predictions? Are they any better than random chance?
Well, Taleb argues that in these black swan-prone areas, experts often do worse than random chance.
Wait, worse than random chance? Are you serious?
He cites a study that compared expert political and economic forecasts to simple algorithms.
Oh, wow.
And the algorithms consistently outperform the experts.
So maybe we shouldn't be listening to all those talking heads on TV who claim to know what's going to happen next.
Maybe a healthy dose of skepticism is in order?
Especially when it comes to those areas where black swans are lurking. But why do you think those experts did so poorly in that study?
Because they were so focused on their narrow specialties, they missed the bigger picture.
They were looking at the trees and missed the forest.
Exactly.
They were playing chess when they should have been playing poker.
They got caught in the ludic fallacy.
The ludic fallacy.
Yeah. It's essentially the mistake of assuming that the real world operates with the same neat, predictable rules as a game.
So they're mistaking the game for reality.
Exactly. forgetting that in life there are always those unexpected factors, those black
Or if you
swans.
can throw everything off course.
Even those who are supposed to be experts in their
They
fields.
can still fall prey to these biases and illusions.
And this brings us to a crucial shift in thinking, moving away from the pursuit of predicting black swans and towards what Taleb calls the power of negative knowledge.
Negative knowledge. I like how he frames it that way, but what does that actually mean? What is negative knowledge?
It's about acknowledging the limits of our understanding
Okay.
and focusing on what we don't know rather than clinging to illusions of certainty.
So instead of trying to figure out what will happen, we should be focusing on preparing for the fact that something will happen,
Exactly.
even if we don't know what it is.
It's a subtle but incredibly powerful shift in perspective.
It's about recognizing that in Extremistan, those unknown unknowns.
They're the ones that can really blindside us.
This is definitely making me rethink my whole approach to risk and decision-making.
And that's precisely the point.
Recognizing the limitations of our knowledge is the first step.
Towards making better decisions in a world that's constantly throwing us curveballs.
It sounds like we have a lot more to unpack here.
We do.
Maybe we should take a moment to let all this sink in.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Before we dive into the practical strategies for navigating this unpredictable world,
That sounds like a plan.
we'll be back after a short break to explore how we can use this understanding of black swans to our advantage.
Welcome back. You know, before we took a moment to reflect, we were talking about how even philosophers can get trapped in their own little theoretical worlds.
Forgetting that real life doesn't always fit into those neat little categories.
Exactly. And that brings us to a tool that's often misused and misinterpreted.
A tool?
Yeah, the Gaussian bell curve,
Ah, yes, the infamous bell curve.
a favorite among statisticians.
But you wouldn't describe Taleb as a fan, would you?
Not exactly. He actually refers to it as the great intellectual fraud.
Okay, now I really want to hear why he's so against it.
Well, the problem is that the Gaussian bell curve, while useful in certain areas, is often misapplied to areas where it just doesn't fit.
Okay, so like what?
Think back to our discussion about Mediocristan and Extremistan.
Okay. Yeah.
The bell curve is very much a Mediocristan tool. It works well for things like height and weight, where extreme outliers are rare.
Right.
But in Extremistan, where those impactful black swans reside, it can be incredibly misleading.
So using the bell curve in Extremistan is like trying to, I don't know, measure the ocean's depth with a ruler.
Exactly. It's just not the right tool for the job.
It's assuming a level of stability that just doesn't exist.
The bell curve assumes this world of gentle randomness, where extreme events are so unlikely that they can be safely ignored.
But in
It's
Extremistan,
the stream events,
those are the ones that really matter.
and that's where the bell curve can be dangerously misleading.
So like, if I'm trying to model, say, market crashes,
Or the success of startups.
I'm going to be in for a big surprise.
Because you're assuming this level of stability that simply doesn't exist.
Okay, I'm starting to see the problem here.
Take wealth distribution as an example.
Okay.
If you looked at it through the lens of the bell curve, you'd expect to see most people clustered around the average.
With a few outliers on either end.
Right, but that's not how wealth is actually distributed.
So it's less of a gentle bell curve and more like, I don't know, a steep mountain peak.
With most of the wealth concentrated at the very top.
Right, so the bell curve drastically underestimates the potential for those extreme, unpredictable events.
Exactly. And that's why Taleb advocates for a different approach, one that acknowledges the power of those fat tails.
Fat tails.
Yeah, those extreme events that lie outside the bell curve's narrow focus.
So if we ditch the bell curve, what's the alternative? How do we measure these fat tails and wrap our heads around Extremistan randomness?
Well, one very interesting model is fractal randomness.
Fractals, like those beautiful, infinitely repeating patterns.
The very same.
What do fractals have to do with risk and uncertainty?
It turns out that many real-world phenomena, including those in Extremistan, exhibit fractal properties.
Okay, I'm listening.
Think about the Mandelbrot set, those incredibly intricate images.
Yeah, they're mesmerizing.
They're generated by a simple recursive rule, and those same principles of self-similarity and scaling,
Yeah.
they can be applied to understanding things like market fluctuations or the distribution of city sizes.
So even though these systems seem random on the surface,
There are these underlying patterns.
that we can start to recognize.
And one of the key characteristics of fractal randomness
Yeah.
is that it allows for those black swan events to occur more frequently than the bell curve would predict.
So it's a more accurate reflection of how these complex systems actually behave.
Precisely.
It's like we're finally using a map that acknowledges the existence of, mountains and valleys.
Instead of just assuming a flat landscape.
Okay, I like that analogy. So if even sophisticated models like the bell curve can mislead us, how do we avoid falling into that trap of thinking we can predict the unpredictable?
That's where it becomes crucial to acknowledge the limits of our knowledge
Okay.
and focus on what we don't know.
Embrace that negative knowledge.
Exactly.
You know, it's interesting that even people whose job it is to make us aware of uncertainty, they can fall prey to these flawed models.
Who are you thinking of?
Well, I'm thinking of philosophers.
Philosophers.
Yeah, you know, those deep thinkers who ponder the big questions of existence.
You'd think they'd be more comfortable with uncertainty.
You would, wouldn't you? But it turns out that even philosophers can get trapped in their own neat theoretical worlds.
Forgetting that the messy reality of Extremistan,
Doesn't always fit into those tidy categories.
they commit the ludic fallacy.
The ludic fallacy.
Yeah,
Remind me what that is again.
it's essentially the mistake of assuming that the real world operates with the same neat, predictable rules as a game.
So they're playing chess when they should be playing poker.
Exactly.
Just like those experts who rely too heavily on the bell curve.
Right. And it highlights an essential point.
Which is?
Negative knowledge isn't just about recognizing the limits of other people's knowledge.
It's about being honest with ourselves.
About the gaps in our own understanding.
Embracing that discomfort of not knowing. So it's a call for intellectual humility.
Exactly.
Being willing to admit that we don't have all the answers.
And that's okay.
Yeah. It's not a sign of weakness.
Not at all. It's about recognizing that we're all fallible.
We're all human.
And that's part of what makes life so interesting.
So if we can't predict those black swan events, then what? What do we do?
Well, that's a great question.
And it's exactly what we'll explore after a short break. We'll delve into some practical strategies for thriving in a world that's full of surprises. Welcome back. You know, before the break, we were talking about the limitations of our knowledge and how even philosophers can get kind of stuck in those abstract theories.
And miss those real-world black swans.
Exactly. It all comes back to that idea of negative knowledge, you know, acknowledging the things we don't know. Which brings us to a really big question. How do we even make decisions in a world that's fundamentally unpredictable? It's easy to feel kind of paralyzed by all that uncertainty. Like, what's the point of planning for a future we can't even wrap our heads around?
That's the trap we really need to avoid.
So don't give up on planning altogether.
No. Taleb isn't saying that at all. He actually offers some very practical strategies for navigating this kind of uncertainty. Remember, it's all about mitigating the negative impact of those black swan events while maximizing our chances of benefiting from the positive ones.
Okay, that makes sense. So what are some of those strategies? Give me the key takeaways. What can we actually do in our own lives to be more prepared for these black swans?
We've already touched on the importance of being a fox, not a hedgehog.
Right. Stay nimble, adapt to changing circumstances.
Exactly. Be flexible, be open to new information. Don't get too attached to one grand theory or ideology.
So no dogma, no fixed beliefs.
Right. Be willing to change your mind when new information comes along.
Intellectual humility is key.
Exactly. Because a black swan could come along and completely upend those beliefs anyway.
Now, remind me about those barbell strategies we talked about before the break.
Ah, yes, the weightlifting approach to risk management.
Okay.
It's about finding a balance between protecting yourself from catastrophic loss by creating a solid foundation.
Yeah, like a safety net.
Right.
But at the same time, leaving room for those high potential, high impact opportunities.
Like reaching for the stars.
Okay. So it's like having a safety net while still reaching for those stars. Instead of going all in on one super risky venture.
You balance it out with a more stable source of income.
Right. Or maybe you're pursuing a creative passion, but you have a backup plan in case that big break takes longer than you hoped.
That's a great way to think about it. And this approach, it can be applied to so many areas of life.
Yeah.
Investments, career choices, even relationships. It's all about managing that downside risk while still being open to those unexpected opportunities that could change everything.
And speaking of unexpected opportunities, we were talking about serendipity before the break. How do we actually create the conditions for those happy accidents to occur? It's not like we can just, wish for them to happen.
Right. It's more about creating an environment where they're more likely to occur.
Okay, so like what?
Go to conferences. Talk to people outside your field. Be open to new experiences. Put yourself out there and see what happens.
So it's about getting out of our comfort zone.
Exactly. And when those unexpected opportunities do arise, be ready to seize them.
Don't be so rigid.
Right. Don't get so caught up in your plans that you miss the chance to embrace the unexpected.
So much of this is about our mindset, isn't it? Moving away from that need to predict and control everything.
Absolutely. It's about asking, what's the most robust course of action, given what I know and what I don't know.
Okay, yeah, because a lot of times we think we know more than we do.
Right. Especially in Extremistan. It's about accepting that uncertainty is part of the game.
It's not the enemy.
Exactly. And the key is not to try and eliminate it, but to learn how to navigate it.
So we've explored a lot of ground today, from those unpredictable black swans lurking in the shadows, to the limits of our knowledge, the dangers of clinging to those comforting but ultimately flawed models. And honestly, I'm feeling a little bit more hopeful than when we started,
That's good to hear.
because we've learned that the future isn't just this, linear projection of the past.
It's being shaped by events that are outside our current understanding.
And for me, the big takeaway is this idea of negative knowledge, of embracing those unknown unknowns and being ready for those game-changing moments that we can never fully anticipate.
It's a call for humility, adaptability, and a willingness to embrace the unexpected.
So as we wrap up our deep dive today, I have a question for all of you listening out there. If, as Taleb suggests, the future is mostly shaped by these unpredictable events, how does that change the way you think about planning, goal setting, and even the meaning of success? Because maybe in a world of black swans, the most important skill is not prediction, but adaptability.
And perhaps the greatest success isn't avoiding those unexpected events, but learning how to turn them to our advantage.
That's certainly some food for thought. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of black swans. Until next time, stay curious, stay adaptable, and keep an eye out for those game-changing moments that are lurking just around the corner.